Okay, so have you ever sent an email and it just completely backfired?
Oh, yeah.
Even though technically what you said was correct?
Happens all the time.
Well, turns out there's a whole field of study dedicated to why that happens.
Really?
It's called pragmatics.
Okay.
And that's what today's deep dive is all about.
Right.
Equipping you with the tools to become a communication ninja, right?
I like it.
So you sent over a stack of articles from the Discourse Analyzer AI toolkit, and it's all about how pragmatics and discourse analysis kind of work together to help us understand communication beyond just the dictionary definition of words.
It's fascinating stuff.
So buckle up.
Yeah.
We're going on a journey to uncover the hidden code of communication.
I'm ready.
First up, let's talk about the foundations of pragmatics.
Okay.
This field actually has deep roots in philosophy.
Do you know that?
Yeah. Guys like Wittgenstein, Austin, and Grice, some of the pioneers that laid the groundwork for how we even think about language and meaning today.
It's amazing how these articles take us from those historical roots all the way to how these principles are being used to understand online communication.
It is really cool. So Wittgenstein,
Yes.
with his language games idea,
Yeah.
argued that meaning isn't inherent in the words themselves,
Oh, interesting.
but it comes from how we use them in different social situations.
Right. It's like checkmate in a chess game means something totally different than checkmate in a heated argument, right?
Great. The same word.
Totally different vibes.
Yeah, totally different vibes.
Yeah.
And then we have Austin, with his theory of speech acts,
Oh, yeah.
showed us that words can actually do things.
Like when a judge says guilty, they're not just describing a state of being.
Right.
They're changing someone's legal reality with that single word.
Performing an action through language.
It's powerful stuff.
And then there's Grice, my favorite, with his cooperative principle.
Yeah.
Proposes that we assume people are trying to be informative, truthful, relevant, and clear when we talk to them.
Yeah.
We rely on these unspoken rules all the time. Think about a time you felt someone was being really vague.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they were violating Grice's maxims. Was it intentional? Now you have a framework to analyze why that interaction felt off.
Ooh, that is so useful.
So we've got these big philosophical ideas about language, but how did we get to discourse analysis?
Yeah.
Where does pragmatics fit into that evolution?
Well, you see, as the field of linguistics grew,
Yeah.
researchers wanted to understand how meaning is made in longer stretches of speech or text,
Okay.
which is essentially discourse.
Got it.
And pragmatics turned out to be the key to unlocking that.
So it's like grammar gives you the Lego blocks, but pragmatics is the instruction manual that shows you how to actually build something awesome with those blocks.
Perfect analogy. And as discourse analysis developed, researchers started applying these pragmatic concepts to understand everything,
Everything.
from political speeches and advertising to online forums,
Wow.
and even casual conversation.
That's where it gets juicy.
It does.
So we got the historical context.
Okay,
Let's dive into some of the key concepts.
let's do it.
Starting with speech acts.
All right.
So you know how sometimes in meetings, someone will say, let's circle back to that later.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not really about scheduling.
Yeah.
Speech act theory helps us see that phrase is actually a politeness strategy to shut down a topic without directly saying no.
It's true.
Yeah.
Speech acts are simply actions performed through language.
Yeah.
Like you said before, promising, apologizing, declaring.
Mm.
They're all actions we do by speaking, and that applies to so many areas. Think about advertising.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about giving you information.
Yeah.
It's trying to persuade you to buy something.
It's trying to perform the act of convincing you to empty your wallet.
Exactly.
Okay. Next up, context.
Okay.
Seems obvious, but these articles really emphasize how crucial it is.
Yeah.
Like, imagine you're texting a friend about a movie. You say, this movie is wild.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be confused unless you establish which movie this even refers to.
Right.
Deixis is all about those references that give our words specific meaning.
Yes, both the immediate words surrounding an utterance, what we call cotext, and the broader situation are huge in determining meaning.
Oh, okay.
Like, can you pass the salt?
Right.
Means something different at dinner than it does, say, in a chemistry lab.
Right.
The articles even talk about how crucial context is in legal cases.
Oh, wow.
A single word in a contract can have vastly different implications depending on the specific situation and the intentions of everyone involved.
You've officially made legal jargon sound exciting.
I try.
Speaking of reading between the lines, we've got to talk about implicature. This is where things get really sneaky.
It does.
Right. Think about that classic sitcom scene where someone says, "Oh, that's just great," in a totally sarcastic tone.
Right.
The words are positive, but we all know they mean the opposite.
Right.
Implicature in action.
Yeah.
And it's everywhere.
Implicature is all about implied meanings, the things we understand, even though they're not directly stated.
Right.
And we rely on it all the time to understand humor. Avoid being too blunt, or even persuade someone. Like, an ad might not outright say it will make you irresistible.
Yeah.
But the visuals and the music sure do imply it.
So it's like the secret layer of meaning that makes communication way more complex than just decoding words on a page.
Precisely. Now let's move on to another fascinating concept. Politeness.
Okay.
Much deeper than just saying please and thank you.
Yeah.
The articles dive into how politeness is really about managing social harmony and avoiding those awkward moments that could threaten someone's face, their social standing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So it's not just about being nice, it's about understanding the unspoken rules of a given situation and adapting your language to maintain those social bonds.
Exactly. What might considered polite in one context could be seen as totally rude in another.
Yeah.
Think about how online communication throws new challenges at politeness.
Right.
How do you manage face saving in a world of online anonymity?
Yeah.
How do people use things like emojis or all les caps to convey tone in a text message?
It's like the internet is its own massive language game.
It is.
And we're all trying to figure out the rules as we go.
Exactly. And that's what makes pragmatics so fascinating. It helps us understand not just the rules of the game, but also how those rules are constantly evolving, especially in our digital age.
It's true.
Yeah.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the hidden code of communication.
I'm excited to be back.
Last time we talked about how pragmatics helps us understand the intentions and social dynamics behind the words.
Right. We dug into concepts like speech acts and context.
Oh, and that ever so slippery implicature.
We do.
But how do researchers actually apply these concepts to real-world situations? It seems like it would get messy out there.
You are absolutely right.
In the wilds of actual conversations.
It does. It does.
Having these pragmatic concepts is like having a high-tech metal detector.
It is.
It's great for finding treasure.
Yeah.
But you still have to dig through a lot of dirt and rocks to get to the good stuff.
That's true.
And these articles actually address that.
They do?
They lay out some of the biggest challenges researchers face when trying to analyze real-world discourse through a pragmatic lens.
Right.
Okay, so what are some of the things that make applying pragmatics so tricky?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the fact that language is inherently ambiguous.
What do you mean?
Words can have multiple meanings, and those meanings can shift depending on the context.
Ah.
Remember that classic example, I saw the man with the telescope? Did I have the telescope or did the man?
Oh, yeah.
It all depends on how you interpret the sentence.
It's like one of those optical illusions where you can see two different images depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. And that ambiguity is amplified when you factor in things like cultural differences,
Right.
social norms, and even just individual personalities.
Right.
What might seem perfectly clear to one person could be totally confusing to someone else.
So even with all these fancy pragmatic tools, there's still a lot of room for subjective interpretation.
Absolutely.
It's tough out there for a pragmatician.
It is.
Which is why it's so important for researchers to be super rigorous in their methods.
It is, yeah.
They have to acknowledge their own biases
Right.
and try to see things from multiple perspectives.
Absolutely.
It's like being a detective and a therapist.
Right.
You need sharp observation skills.
Yeah.
And the ability to empathize with different points of view.
That's a great way to put it. And the articles really emphasize the importance of considering the broader context.
The context.
The who, what, when, and where of a conversation.
Right. You can't just analyze the words in a vacuum.
Right.
You have to understand the social, cultural, and historical factors that shape their meaning.
Okay, that makes sense. Like, you can't fully grasp the meaning of a political speech unless you know something about the speaker, the audience, and the current political climate.
Precisely. And this need to consider the bigger picture is why we see more and more collaboration happening between linguists and researchers from fields like sociology, anthropology, and even psychology.
It's like pragmatics is becoming the ultimate interdisciplinary team sport.
Exactly. exactly. It's all about connecting language to the wider social and cognitive landscape.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so context is crucial.
It is.
And we need to be aware of our own biases.
Yes.
But what about the challenge of actually identifying those hidden meanings and assumptions that are so central to pragmatics?
Yeah.
How do you pin down something that isn't even directly stated?
That is a huge challenge in pragmatics research. I bet.
Because those implicit meanings rely entirely on the listener's ability to read between the lines.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a riddle. You have to use your knowledge of the world and your understanding of the speaker to figure out what they really mean.
So it's less about decoding the words themselves and more about understanding the whole situation, the speaker's intentions, and those unspoken rules of communication.
Exactly. And this is especially tricky when you're dealing with things like sarcasm or humor.
Right.
Where the speaker might be saying the opposite of what they mean.
Oh, yeah.
Or in cross-cultural communication, where the rules of the language game might be completely different.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are in a different language.
Yes. That's a great analogy.
It's a tough one.
It is. It is.
So how do researchers even begin to tackle this challenge of uncovering those hidden meanings?
Yeah.
Well, they have a few tricks up their sleeve.
They do.
Okay. Spill the secrets.
Okay.
What are their go-to strategies for cracking the code of implicature?
One approach is to meticulously analyze the context, both the immediate words surrounding an utterance and the broader social situation.
Okay.
They also rely on those pragmatic theories we talked about, like Grice's cooperative principle, to see how speakers might be playing with or even breaking those conversational norms.
So if someone says something that seems totally irrelevant or off topic, it could be a clue that they're trying to imply something else.
Precisely. They might be trying to be polite, change the subject, or even throw some subtle shade.
Ooh, yeah.
And researchers are also turning to more empirical methods.
Like what?
Like giving people scenarios.
Oh, okay.
And asking them to fill in the missing dialogue or interpret a tricky statement.
Okay.
It's like they're trying to get a peek inside people's minds.
Wow.
To see how they make those pragmatic leaps.
So they're combining linguistic theory with a bit of psychological detective work.
Exactly. Exactly.
You like that.
And of course, we can't forget about the role of technology.
Right.
As computational tools get more sophisticated.
Yeah.
They're becoming incredibly useful for analyzing those massive data sets of text and speech that we generate every day.
It's like they're giving us a bird's eye view of how people actually use language in the real world.
They are.
Yeah.
Yes. And one area where these computational tools are proving especially helpful is in the analysis of multimodal discourse.
Wait, rewind.
Yeah.
Multimodal discourse.
Yeah.
Remind me what that fancy term means again.
It refers to communication that goes beyond just words.
Okay.
It includes things like images, videos, gestures, and even emojis.
Ah, right.
Okay.
So in the digital age, we're not just talking, we're communicating with a whole symphony of tools.
Yeah, exactly. And multimodal discourse presents a whole new set of challenges for pragmatics.
I can imagine. So what makes it so tricky to analyze?
Well, for one thing, it requires researchers to go beyond traditional linguistic tools.
Okay.
They have to consider how all those different modes of communication, words, images, sounds, gestures, all work together to create meaning.
So it's like trying to analyze a movie.
Yes.
You can't just focus on the dialogue. You have to pay attention to the cinematography, the music, the acting, everything.
Exactly. And it also requires an even more nuanced understanding of context.
Okay.
Think about how a single emoji can completely change the interpretation of a text message.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Like a thumbs up could mean, okay, sounds good, or even screw you.
It could.
Depending on the emoji and the situation.
Precisely. And to tackle this, researchers are turning to fields like visual communication and semiotics.
What's semiotics?
Which is the study of signs and symbols.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So pragmatics is basically becoming a superhero team.
Yep.
Recruiting experts from all these different fields to help crack the code of multimodal communication.
That's a great way to put it.
Cool.
And as technology continues to blur the lines between different modes of communication, the field of multimodal pragmatics will only become more important.
Okay, so we've talked about ambiguity, implicit meanings, multimodal discourse. What other challenges are lurking out there for pragmatic researchers?
Well, as our world becomes increasingly interconnected, the need to navigate cultural and linguistic diversity is a huge challenge.
Right, because what might be considered polite or appropriate in one culture could be completely different in another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So researchers are working hard to develop more culturally sensitive approaches to pragmatics.
Okay.
Drawing on insights from anthropology and cross-cultural communication studies.
It's like you need to be a cultural chameleon.
You do.
To really understand how pragmatics works across different languages and communities.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it's not just about avoiding faux pas.
Yeah.
It's also about understanding the power dynamics.
Oh, interesting.
That are often embedded in language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the way we speak and the words we use can either reinforce or challenge existing social hierarchies.
Exactly.
Wow.
And to study this, researchers are using critical discourse analysis, which helps them examine how language is used to perpetuate or resist social inequalities.
So it's like pragmatics isn't just about understanding how we communicate.
Right.
It's also about understanding how communication can shape our world, for better or worse.
That's a powerful insight.
It is.
And it highlights why it's crucial to approach pragmatics with a critical and ethical lens.
Yeah, for sure. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey exploring this hidden code of communication.
We have.
Haven't we? From the philosophy behind how language shapes meaning to those real-world challenges researchers face when they try to decode actual conversations.
It's been a wild ride, but,
Yeah.
It strikes me that for something called pragmatics, we've been pretty theoretical so far.
Yeah, you're right. We've laid a solid foundation, but now it's time to get practical.
Okay.
What are some concrete ways that we can use these principles to become better communicators in our everyday lives?
That's a great question. Thankfully, the articles you've shared really deliver on the practical advice.
Okay, good.
One of the most powerful applications of pragmatics is in improving communication.
Okay.
Whether in our personal relationships, professional settings, or even online.
Okay, so less theory, more action.
Right.
Give us the goods. What are some tangible things we can do to level up our communication game?
Well, the first thing is to really understand the importance of context. We've talked about this a lot, but it's worth repeating. The meaning of what we say can change drastically depending on the situation, our relationship with the other person, and even the cultural norms at play.
Right. It's like you said before, it's not enough to just know the words. You have to know the rules of the game. And those rules can change depending on who you're talking to and where you are.
Exactly. And this awareness of context needs to go beyond just the words themselves.
Okay.
We have to pay attention to things like our tone of voice, body language, and even the specific words we choose. What might be appropriate in one situation could be a total disaster in another.
So pragmatics gives you this mental checklist before you speak. Who am I talking to? What's the goal of this interaction? What are the unspoken rules of this situation?
Precisely. And by being mindful of those things, we can communicate more clearly, build stronger relationships, and avoid those awkward misunderstandings that can lead to conflict.
Okay, context, check. What else is on our pragmatic checklist for better communication?
Another key principle is to be more aware of our speech acts.
Right.
Remember, every time we speak, we're not just conveying information, we're actually doing something in the world.
Right, like when you say, I promise, you're not just describing a promise, you're making a commitment. Words have power.
Exactly. And by being more conscious of the actions we perform with our words, we can become more intentional and deliberate in our communication. This is especially helpful in professional settings. Instead of just asking, can you finish this by Friday?
Yeah.
You could say, I request that this be completed by Friday. It sounds more formal, but it also makes your communication more clear and assertive.
Ooh, I like that power move. So speech acts, check. But what about those tricky situations where we need to disagree with someone or deliver bad news? How can pragmatics help us navigate those conversational minefields without blowing everything up?
That's where politeness strategies come in. Remember, politeness isn't just about saying please and thank you. It's about showing respect for the other person's face, which is basically their social standing and self-image.
Right, and I remember you saying that different cultures have different ideas of what's considered polite, so we have to be sensitive to those nuances.
Absolutely. What might be seen as polite in one culture could be completely rude in another, but even within the same culture, there are ways to soften the blow when we have to deliver messages that could threaten someone's face.
Right.
Like if you have to give critical feedback to a coworker or tell a friend some bad news.
Okay, so give us the secrets. What are some of those ninja politeness moves?
One strategy is to use indirect language. Instead of saying you're wrong, you might say, I see things a bit differently. It allows you to express your disagreement without being confrontational.
So it's like you're acknowledging their perspective while still standing your ground.
Exactly. Another strategy is to use hedges, which are words or phrases that soften the impact of a statement. Instead of saying, I need this done today, you might say, I'd really appreciate it if you could try to get this done today. It's a small change, but it shows that you're considering their workload and not just barking orders.
It's like you're adding a little cushion to those potentially harsh statements.
Right.
Indirect language and hedges. Got it. What else?
Another helpful technique is to start by expressing appreciation or giving a compliment before you deliver the potentially negative news. It's like creating a more positive atmosphere before you have to say something that might be hard to hear.
So it's like, you're doing a great job, but...
Precisely. It's not about being manipulative. It's about showing that you value the person and their efforts, even if you have some constructive criticism to offer.
Okay, politeness strategies. Got it. I'm feeling more confident already. But, one area where I still struggle is understanding those unspoken meanings, those implicatures.
I understand. It's definitely one of the trickiest aspects of pragmatics, but it's also one of the most rewarding to master.
So how do we become better at decoding those hidden messages? Are there any tips for becoming a master of reading between the lines?
The first step is simply to be more aware that implicature exists. Start paying attention to those times when people say things that aren't literally true, or when they seem to be hinting at something without saying it directly.
So it's like training myself to notice those subtle cues and to think about what the speaker might really be trying to say.
Exactly. And context is your best friend here. If someone says something that seems out of place or irrelevant, consider the situation, their relationship to the other people involved, and any shared knowledge they might have. That can help you figure out the puzzle of their intended meaning.
Context is key. I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. But what about when I'm the one trying to use implicature? How do I do that without being so vague that people are left totally confused?
That's a great question. It's definitely a balancing act. You want to be subtle enough that you're not being overly blunt, but you also don't want to be so obscure that your message gets lost in translation. One helpful tip is to rely on shared knowledge. If you know that the listener has certain information or shares certain beliefs, you can use that to craft your implied message.
So it's like I'm dropping hints based on what I know they already know.
Exactly. But always remember that implicature is a powerful tool that should be used carefully. Because implied meanings can be easily misinterpreted, it's important to be mindful of the potential consequences. If clarity and accuracy are crucial, like in a legal document or a medical diagnosis, it's best to be as explicit as possible.
Right, no room for misinterpretation in those situations.
But in more casual conversations, implicature can be incredibly useful for adding humor, being persuasive, or even building closer relationships.
It's like implicature is a spice. A little bit can add a lot of flavor, but too much can ruin the whole dish.
That's a perfect analogy. It's all about using this tool wisely and ethically.
Okay, so we've talked about context, speech acts, politeness strategies, and implicature. Anything else we should keep in mind as we venture forth on our quest for better communication?
One final point I'd like to emphasize is the importance of being an active listener. It's not enough to just focus on what we're saying. We also have to pay attention to what the other person is communicating, both verbally and non-verbally.
So it's like we have to become communication detectives, picking up on those subtle cues that can reveal so much about what someone really means.
Exactly. Pay attention to their tone of voice, their facial expressions, their body language, and don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions if you're not sure what they mean. Sometimes it's better to say, "Can you explain that a different way?" than to make assumptions and end up with a communication breakdown.
Right. It's like that saying, when in doubt, ask.
Exactly. And by being an active listener, you show the other person that you genuinely care about what they have to say, which can build trust and create a more positive and productive conversation.
Active listening. Check. Adding that to my toolbox right now.
Excellent. And remember, mastering pragmatics is a journey, not a destination. It's something you develop over time by practicing, observing, and being open to learning new things about how communication works.
It's like we're all students in the School of Pragmatics.
We are.
Constantly learning and refining our communication skills.
Exactly. And the more you learn, the more you'll realize how fascinating and complex human communication really is.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of pragmatics and discourse analysis. It's been an incredible journey.
It has.
And I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how language shapes our interactions.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
And dear listener, remember that pragmatics is everywhere. It's in the way we talk to our partners, in the way we negotiate at work, in the way we consume news and media, and even in the way we think about the world around us.
So keep those pragmatic ears and eyes open. And remember that the more you understand about the subtle nuances of language, the more effectively you can communicate, build relationships, and even inspire change.
And on that inspiring note, we bid you farewell. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of pragmatics and discourse analysis.